Nothing that happened at Abu Ghraib was as horrific and agonizing and horrible and painful and then leading to death as what happened to Jessica Crank in the United States of America. Where were the right to life groups on this one? This person was born. Where was the right to life for that human being? And you know, remember Sarah Palin, she was talking about those death panels. Well, here's a situation of death panels, a two-person death panel that decides whether or not another human being lives or dies. That's the situation that we're in the United States of America, because this happened because of privileging in American law, where you saw politicians in Tennessee who succumbed to pressure from religious lobbying that mattered more to these politicians than did modern medical science or the life of this girl. That's what we're seeing in the United States of America today. And I want to talk to you about a third form of religiously based child abuse. This one is much more commonly discussed. I'll illustrate it with Father Paul Shanley. Some of you may know of Father Paul Shanley. He's from my region in New England. Father Shanley attended the Man-Boy Love Association meetings. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's wrong. Not a real supporter of the Man-Boy Love Association myself. But you can have a situation where someone does something that's inappropriate. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about something much more systemic. I'm talking about the fact that Father Shanley's boss, Bishop Daly, knew that Father Shanley was attending the Man-Boy Love Association meetings when he transferred him from Parish A to Parish B to Parish C, endangering children all along the way. That's what we're seeing. And you know what the Catholic Church says? And they say it still. They say that they have a First Amendment free expression clause right to keep secret their internal employee decisions when they transfer people within their employ. Now, I started a children's museum in Maine. We had people who had access to children. And I think it would be ethical policy. Luckily, we knew of nothing tragic that ever occurred at our children's museum. But if it did, we would open up our information about any employee about such an allegation, because the first thing that we got to care about is the children. That has not been the position of the Catholic Church with regard to their administration and this assertion that they have this First Amendment right to make secret decisions about pedophiles. And another irony is that in my home state of Maine, of all the moral issues last year that you could talk about helping people in the Sudan. You could talk about helping low-income people in the United States. There are a lot of moral issues you could talk about. But in the state of Maine, what was the one issue that the Catholic Church handed out flyers regarding every Sunday? Against gay marriage in the state of Maine. So that required action on their part, while their lawyers were simultaneously and sometimes successfully postponing cases with this argument about how we can keep secret our internal employment decisions. Now, what you'll hear when discussing these types of issues is that, again, it is a First Amendment right. It's a constitutional right, freedom of religion. The only problem is that is not true. In the Prince versus Massachusetts case, 1943, the Supreme Court was clear that you cannot place a child in a situation of ill health or death on the basis of religion. And even under this Justice Roberts Court, they haven't overturned that one yet. So that's the law of the land today. At least it is in terms of rulings. But all these laws that I talked about in Tennessee are widespread. And I know what you're thinking. Alabama with the first situation, Tennessee with the other situation. With regard to the faith healing, the so-called faith healing, I don't call it faith healing, I call it faith killing, because that's more like what it is. But there are over 35 states. It's not just the Deep South. Over 35 states have some form of exemption from law for medical neglect for children. A special right to say that I can neglect my child medically. That only applies for religious groups. Why is that? Well, John Witt at Emory University, at the Center for the Study of Separation of Church and State, says that in America today, separation of church and state is no longer the law of the land. How did we get in this situation? Well, for me, I think back to around the corner from here, or a couple miles down the road. I went to Marina High School in Huntington Beach. And when I was in high school, I was a shy kid, and I said, I got to do something to get out, meet people. And so I tried out for a play, and I studied, my lines to be ready to try out for the play, and worked hard, and I got the lead. I got the lead in a play called Inherit the Wind, which is about the Scopes monkey trials, and I got the Clarence Darrow part in that play. And let me tell you, if you want to have your worldview affected, memorize all the lines of Clarence Darrow in the Scopes monkey trials, and that will affect how you view separation of church and state and evolution and a whole range of other things. But the interesting point here is that that play was written in the 1950s, and it was looking back on the 1920s. And you could tell by the whole spirit, the whole tone of the play was saying, glad we're moving on. Too bad about those bad old days back in the 20s. We're moving on to the uplands, separation of church and state. We're moving on to a more rationalistic worldview. But that's not what happened, is it? That's not what happened in recent 20th century, late 20th century history in the United States of America. Why is that so? Part of it has to do with power, church power. Now, make no mistake, churches were very powerful in the mid-20th century America, no doubt about it. But the nature of churches has changed in recent decades. It's not the church with the soup kitchen anymore. We're talking about the church with the ice cream parlor. These are real examples. The church with the fitness center. The church with the multi-million-dollar broadcasting facility. And the church with millions upon millions of dollars in lobbying power. That is a different kind. That is a different nature of what churches are about. And they have been successful in changing the face of America and of American law. If you listen to Rush Limbaugh, he'll tell you, got to watch out for that affirmative action, because affirmative action is really special rights, and we're against special rights. But you got to admit, Secular Coalition for America, we don't lobby one way or the other on the issue of affirmative action, but you got to admit that at least for the African Americans, with the centuries of slavery and the decade upon decade of violation of civil rights, that there's at least a reasonable argument for affirmative action. But special rights for religion, because I'll tell you, when you want to talk about special rights, I'll tell you what it is. Elevating one class of people over another class of people on the basis of religion. That is special rights, and that is what we face in the United States of America, and we have to question it. We have to question how someone like Billy Graham and his organization can have special rights in American society. This is the Billy Graham, by the way, the one who said during the height of the Vietnam War, his view on Vietnam policy was that Jesus was to bring fire upon the earth. That was his idea of a biblical Vietnam policy. It was Billy Graham who said to his very, very close friend, Richard Nixon, we have to watch out for what the Jews will do to this country. That Billy Graham and his multi-million-dollar organization, they get special rights in the United States of America today? Yes, they do. Rick Warren, right in the neighborhood here. Rick Warren of inaugural fame. Rick Warren, who, after all the tithing that he gets a lot of publicity for, after that is worth something approaching $11 million as a preacher. That Rick Warren. His organization, his views, they get special rights in America today? Yes. Yes, they do. And of course, Ted Haggard. Ted Haggard out in Colorado Springs. Ted Haggard's the one who will lecture you about your sex life and against gay sex while having gay sex on meth. That Ted Haggard. But sometimes the sex overshadows the real issue, is the huge multi-million-dollar organization. He may be shamed, but that multi-million-dollar organization is just as powerful and as strong as it ever was. And do they have special rights in American society? Yes, they do. And they have such power. They have such power that I think even secular Americans sometimes don't even notice the level of power that exists. One power that exists in almost every single state of the union is this power. Think of this if you're an employer. Think of this power if you work in any kind of secular business. And someone could say to you at your place of work, you are a Jew. You are fired. Legal. Legal within those institutions. They can say, You're an agnostic like Einstein. You're fired. You're an atheist like Mark Twain. You are fired. That is perfectly legal within these organizations. They have special rights. They have special rights that a lot of folks don't even know about. Boulder County, Colorado. In Boulder County, Colorado, they created a land use zoning law to protect the environment in that county. All right? Except that the fundamentalist groups brought a lawsuit under a law passed by federal politicians in 1991 that accorded special rights to churches. And they succeeded. They won the lawsuit. And so now, for the fundamentalist church in that area, the law with regard to much of land use zoning does not apply to them. That's the kind of America we face today. And that's what Secular Coalition for America is about, and our 10-member organizations are about, is to serve you in this kind of America. But we need to do more, because good people, good-hearted religious people, good-hearted non-religious people are not speaking out enough. And also politicians, even politicians of good intent, are afraid to speak out. And you have to say, in some ways you can understand why politicians would be afraid to speak out, even if they want to speak out on principle. What we ought to do to illustrate this point is we're going to do a little mind experiment here in this room. And we're going to act as if we all are political consultants, and we are going to help our candidate for Congress. And we'll pick the woman in purple back there. She's our candidate. Let's give her a round of applause. She's going to run. We're going to do her a favor, because we're all political consultants. And what's the first thing we're going to do to help our candidate? The first thing we're going to do is ask her for a $10,000 check. Thank you. Much appreciated. Then we're going to do some vetting. Opposition research on herself. We want to find out if you got any little Edwards stuff going on in your background. Just curious, just want to know. Just, because we want it to come out before it gets, in the National Enquirer. Want to help you. We're going to Google everything you ever did or said. Find out everything we can about you. And the staff came up with some statements that you made, and I want to just sort of quote them to you here. Quote number 1, "The clergy dreads the advance of science as witches do the approach of daylight." A little bit harsh, don't you think? Quote number 2, "Religions are all alike, founded upon fables and mythologies." Really, tone that one down. Quote number 3, "Christianity is our particular superstition." Well, what would we political consultants say to our candidate for Congress in the real world of 2010 when you're running for office? Sorry, thumbs down, I think. Unfortunate for you. Maybe you could go